Hey folks, in this video we're going to be covering the latest dev diary for Crusader Kings 3. This is Dev Diary 152, Landless Adventurers Part 2. This is obviously the second part of last week's dev diary. This week they're going to be covering how you become landless, how you can become landed once you are landless, camp officers, decisions that we get. There's a bunch more on top of that, so I will leave timestamps for the video, so if you want to just jump to parts that you're interested in, you can do so. Obviously you want to watch the whole video, but you know, if you are starved for time, you can jump to the bits that you want. I will say straight away, as this is covered right at the end of the dev diary, that we aren't getting landless raiding. Now, I thought we would be. In the last video, I think I said I thought we were getting it, but we aren't actually getting it at all. There is a section at the end, like I say, if you want to jump to that and hear about it, and then obviously come back to this part of the video, please do so. But yeah, we aren't getting landless raiding. I kind of see why we're not, but we'll get into it once we get to that section. But I did just want to call that out because I know many of you won't watch the whole video, and that's fine, but I just wanted to let you know at the start. But anyway, let's get into it. As I said, a lot to cover again this week. A lot of interesting information here and a lot of cool stuff that doesn't even really only affect landless characters. And the first thing, similar to last week, is that they're saying a lot of the things you see here hasn't got full balancing yet, so don't worry about numbers you see, gold rewards, all that kind of stuff. There are going to be changes before it comes out. The first thing they're actually going to cover here is camp purposes. This was shown last week, but it wasn't really explained, and we're going to go through it now. There is also a map here, a little bit of a joke. I'll put it on the screen now so you can see it, but I do believe some of us will also be running away from the Black Death during our campaigns as these landless characters. But yeah, camp purposes, what are these? There are the 6 that they showed off last week. That is Wanderers, Swords for Hire, Scholars, Explorers, Freebooters, and Legitimists. We kind of guessed what these might mean last week. We're actually going to get a breakdown here of exactly what they do. So each one of these, as mentioned last week, has different weightings for the type of contracts that you'll find on the map, different upgrades for their camp buildings, different flavors for controls of their title, and different types of clothes that the followers will wear. So a lot of flavor stuff depending on which one you choose. Expect a lot more glasses and humble clothing for scholars, weapons and armor for Swords for Hire, animal furs and muted outfits for freebooters. The default purpose is Wanderers, which is what they consider the vanilla experience, but each of the other 5 are slightly tailored toward different playstyles. Wanderers can find equal amounts of contracts of any type, and non-historical adventurers will always start as this type. Their main feature is that they can switch to any other purpose for free, whereas the others must pay some prestige for the privilege of switching. So you do start as the default one. You can switch to whatever you want, but then switching between the different ones, there is a cost to do so. Adventurers with a Swords for Hire camp purpose are aimed primarily at mercenary work, and there is going to be a whole section about how that works later on. They will find more martial and prowess contracts, as well as more offers to help out in wars. Their camp upgrades focus on making things better for fighting. This is very much the Roger de Fleur experience, definitely how you pronounce his name, though hopefully you will have a happier end than he had. The next one is Scholars. Scholars specialize in learning and stewardship contracts and have the most varied camp upgrades. They're intended to play a little bit like the early life of Michael Scott, not that one, guys. You roam from place to place, educating the children of nobility, picking up the finest minds you can find, and creating works of learning. An untrusty scholar can be found selling fake relics or collecting taxes under false pretenses. So this one has like a good and bad way you can play it. As a scholar, you're unlikely to win any great battles, but you can help create great rulers, and you could earn yourself a solid plot of land somewhere with time as you build up your reputation. Explorers get more transport contracts, diplomacy contracts, and intrigue contracts as well. AI explorers will also roam much further than AI adventurers, and their upgrades help with schemes, provision usage, and mounted fighting. A dishonest explorer might defraud a ruler or rob the home of its silverware. These are typed a bit more after someone like Marco Polo. Sadly, Crusader Kings 3 does not include any terra incognita, so they couldn't give you a full experience of exploring new lands, but they did do a solid try of trying to have that little bit of like mystery about what you're going to be doing with your character and traveling around the map as much as you can and finding out what you can discover during your adventures. Freebooters, as they call themselves, or brigands as everyone else calls them, find more prowess and intrigue contracts as well as criminal contracts of every kind. Criminal contracts were covered in last week's dev diary if you missed it. There's a little bit more information later on about them as well. These give heavy bonuses for high intrigue and can help you reduce the cost of lowering your gallows bait trait. That was again covered last week. That is the criminal trait they are adding. With freebooters, they've tried to keep in mind the underclass, the scum of the earth, you know, all these really nice people you want to play as. All the types of characters you rarely saw seen in history books. That is, of course, unless you are a bandit that grows large enough that they manage to steal a kingdom, which is going to be wild to do. Something that you can naturally attempt yourself, but depending on how bad your gallows bait is, you may find ruling your lands much more difficult than controlling petty outlaws. So yes, you can steal a kingdom, it looks like, but then obviously all your vassals are going to pretty much hate you, and it's going to be a little bit tricky to keep hold of those lands. I can't imagine the factions that are going to appear immediately once you do that. The last one, but no means least, is Legitimist. This camp purpose is a little bit special, as this is your deposed king returns with an army type where you're reclaiming lands that you got kicked out of. This requires an adventurer to have at least one press claim against a kingdom tier title of some kind, and so this version isn't open for former dukes and counts. So this is a little bit further up the tree. If you get deposed, you can come back using this one. Unlike the rest of the camp purposes, this one is explicitly intended for players who don't want to stay as adventuring for any length of time under any circumstances. Legitimists have a goal in mind and they want to complete that goal. So yeah, if you do become landless and you don't really want to play that, if you don't want to restart a full campaign, you can pick this option, and this is going to get you back into Landed as quick as possible, basically. Legitimists have no weights on the contracts they receive, but instead have a unique contract that other rulers will offer their support in exchange for gold upon its completion. Those benefactors will offer money and troops, but always expect a return on their investment in the form of a payout after your victory. So they're going to help fund you gaining that title back. But then once you do that, you do need to pay them back, or I imagine they're going to have some hefty words for you. So yeah, this is a cool one for getting some land back that you've lost. Legitimists may also proactively ask for help instead of being offered it, in which case you'll need to stump up a hefty sum of prestige for an audience with a prospective sponsors. You can go to other kings and say, hey, can you help me get my land back? After a time limit of between 4 and 8 years, depending on how your negotiations go, each broker will start to become antsy and request their returns back. So yeah, you do have to pay these back, or I guess run the consequences and see what happens. This gives you a final chance to launch your invasion of whatever you've been ready to do, trying to negotiate a slight delay or face the penalties. If you renege on your plan, you will start losing prestige levels per backer, as well as other assorted ill effects. At that point, you are simply an ineffective would-be usurper. So if you take all their money, say you're going to do one of these, and then don't do it, you're going to have a bad time, as we've been saying. Likewise, taking their money and troops and then changing your camp purpose or landing yourself with less than a suitable claim will also be counted as a no-no. They're offering support, but it has strings attached. So yeah, you can't take all of this and then just go off and do something else instead. Of course, you can launch your war before the timer has passed. The timer is simply a deadline for doing so. As already mentioned, they really expect this Legitimist version to be a stepping stone. Maybe you've started the game as a landless character, but you want to get landed as soon as possible with a little bit of, randomization as to where you might be. Or if you choose the new Destiny option that they are adding, you can play as a younger character that maybe has better stats. They're landless, but you want to land them somewhere else and carry on as that player. So that is, again, really what they're going for this. And then going back to how you can switch purposes, this can be done at any time, but there is the cost I mentioned earlier. Any camp upgrades that aren't valid on the new purpose are automatically demolished and gives you a partial refund of the cost. That was mentioned in the last dev diary. They want to encourage players to try playing different purposes, especially if you're an adventurer for a long time, rather than picking one and sticking to it. Different characters can mean different things for your camp, and they encourage you to kind of play around with this system. That's why you get a partial refund. So especially if you're playing like generational landless character, you might have somebody who is good at martial, so you'll build up a martial camp. Then you might get a high intrigue character, then you're going to switch to that version. So this is good that you can change it depending on what your character is and really play as that character. As always, you are going to be able to re-roll your character stats, so you can just play as the same one all the time if you want to. But if you follow the flow of your characters, you can do that with this system as well. Mercenaries in particular will find it hard to get off the ground without a little bit of seed money, and as such can benefit from time spent as freebooters or explorers until they have the money to build an army. That is a good call out there. You can start as some of them, build up your money, and then switch to the one you want to do with a little bit of money behind you. In addition to this, each camp purpose has a small handful of events tied to it, plus special options within other events. Event-based contracts in particular will sometimes contain entire alternate rewards for each camp purpose, even outside of their specialities. Again, I think this leads into what they were saying last week, where you are going to see similar-ish events, obviously, if you play big campaigns as landless, but having these different camp purposes, that is going to alter the events slightly at least, so they can be played out differently with each one of these. Lastly, designing camp purposes gave them the handy means of letting players opt into the type of adventuring they wanted to play as, and that is why they kind of went this route and really allowed you as a player to theme it towards how you want to play the game, which is cool. I like that they have thought about that and added that in. So that is the camp purpose. There's going to be more camp stuff later on with the officers and things like that. But next, they're going to talk about landless to landed and the other way around. How do you become landed? How do you become landless? And the first one is going to be Becoming an Adventurous. This is obviously tied heavily into last week's Dev Diary. The key challenge they had for making Landless Adventurers accessible was giving you a diegetic ways to switch into them without requiring you to lose your entire realm each time. This wouldn't work for veteran players because who the hell manages to lose Crusader Kings 3 that hard once they've mastered the basics? I think they've been on the subreddit there. And it wouldn't work for newbies because they're still trying to work out how to play the game. They don't want to build up all this land and then lose it all because they're switching to this mode. And they really had to balance those two systems out. So what they've tried to do is provide a broad variety of paths to switching into adventuring. Yes, you can do it if you lose your entire realm, but there is also other ways to do it where you can proactively choose for this to happen. Or there's just places where you might consider it and think, okay, I'm a little bit bored playing here. I'm going to become landless for a bit, move somewhere else in the map maybe, and carry on my adventures elsewhere. The one thing that all of these things have together, though, is that, like it or not, you are going a step down. You are becoming a wandering adventurer. You're not going to be quite as prestigious. So what that means is that you will lose all your stored prestige, as well as 3 full prestige levels. So, yeah, you're going to lose all your prestige becoming landless. I think that does make sense. This is both a narrative penalty, a way to guarantee at least some potential for growth, so you can't just switch to landless and have loads of currency to spend. It is also a way to stop famous characters becoming landless adventurers that simply steamroll other empires with powerful casus belli. Again, you could become a king of somewhere, become landless. If there wasn't these penalties for prestige, you could then easily just conquer somewhere else using this system. And it would really negate the kind of point of becoming landless if you had this stored up prestige that you could use immediately. I do like how that's going to work. So as we mentioned at the beginning of this section, how do you become landless? Well, the first way is through succession. We've seen this already, the new destiny option. This was covered in a few of the last dev diaries. And this is when you die. You don't have to play as the next in line. You can choose the choose a new destiny option. And then as you can see in this screenshot, we've seen this before, you get different options. You can play from somebody else in your dynasty. In this one, there's 2 landed characters, but then there is Tostig at the end. He is unlanded. He has the helmet icon instead of a coat of arms, and he is the landless one. You can play as him and then just carry on playing as this character. And then as they said, when he dies, you have the chance to just switch to a landed character as well. So there's multiple ways to get off the train and get back on it as you continue your adventures. The next thing they're going to talk about is runaway princelings. If you have many children, especially several who are far down the line of succession, some of them are going to come to you and say, hey, can I become landless, please? And you can say yes or no, depending on how nice you want to be. And then they'll go off on their adventures. And then when you do get the new destiny option, you can probably choose those people instead of the first son who you would have chosen previously. Now, obviously, these characters do have a mind of their own, so some of them will just run away anyway. Even if you say, nope, you're not allowed to go wandering, they're just going to do it. I would think it's based on their traits. If they're like deceitful or something like that, maybe they're just going to run off and do what they want anyway. So you don't have full control. I would think especially over like your 5th or 6th child, they're thinking there's nothing here for me. I'm going to go out and try and make something of my own. Next, they're going to be talking about historical adventures and creating your own. So as they mentioned last week, we are getting some historical landless characters. Yes, El Cid is here. So in all 3 starting dates, various historical adventures have been pre-scripted and selectable directly from the bookmark screen. For these, they've tried to not add every famous person who wasn't a ruler. Instead, they're focusing on the most notable and those who would fit the camp purposes. So I think there's a few for each purpose type. So if you want to pick a pre-done character, if you want to think of it that way, for this mode, each one of these is going to fit one of them roughly. So you can pick a scholarly one, you can pick a mercenary focus one, and you can get into these adventures that little bit quicker. And then obviously on top of that system, you can create your own landless character to start with, depending on what kind of stats you want to give it and all those kind of things. So you have got the pre-done ones, you can select your own and make one, and that is within all the different kinds of realms, so tribal, feudal, clan, and the new administrative government types as well, and they have that whole different kind of landless character that was covered a couple of weeks ago as well. On top of all of those, there are other ways as well to become landless, so this can be done via decision for certain cultures and faiths. For some people, the lure of adventuring is strong even for those who've already got land, just as long as they don't have very much of it, and for those cultures, they've added the decision to abandon their small realms and take to the road. Since only small, lowish tier rulers can take this decision, you'll never see a high king of the North Sea voluntarily abandoning his empire to go backpacking in the Caucasus. That is cool that they have limited it. So you're not just going to see the Kaiser suddenly decide he wants to become landless or something crazy like that. The following tenets have access to this: Struggle and Submission and Fedayeen from Legacy of Persia. So if you have that DLC, you have some additional kind of content linked to it now. They are also considering adding this to Vows of Poverty, Ascentrism, definitely how you pronounce that, and Mendicant Preachers, again, definitely how you pronounce that. So it looks like potentially those three might get a version of this as well. These are partial tonal fits, but not entirely, so they're still deciding, like I say, if they're going to add those or not. As well as those, they're also giving it to the following cultural traditions: Fatua, Horse Lords, Herd, Swords for Hire, and Coastal Warriors from Northern Lords. And as you can see from the screenshot, become adventurer. For those of you bold and hardy enough to traverse its perils and grasp its opportunities, the world has much to offer. All your landed titles are passed to a new ruler. You will establish an adventurer camp, you will gain some prestige, and you will gain voluntary adventurer for 5 years. And you can see there are a bunch of requirements. You can't just do this as anyone. These are the requirements you need to hit in this example. And with Roads to Power, Normans now have the new Audacious Cadets tradition, amongst various other Normandy things, like making much more eager warmongers and buffing their heavy cavalry. This also enables the decision to abandon your lands and encourages the younger sons of barons to frequently seek off to find their fortune abroad, like the de Hordevilles and countless others. So this is a historical example they're really putting into the game to try and get it to play out like Normans did historically. The Swords for Hire cultural tradition likewise causes other irrelevant young characters to try seek their fortunes abroad. These two together means that it is now distressingly historical to see floods of Normans adventuring in Western Europe and Turks adventuring the Middle East and Eastern Europe, which is cool. Like I say, bringing these historical things that happened into the game as well as they can, and this system fits these two pretty ideal, so that is cool to see. Next, we're going to be talking about rich and interesting wanderers. The rich side, well, that is just characters that are landless, that suddenly have a bunch of gold from somewhere. Where they've got this, who knows? These characters might decide that this cash is burning a hole in their pockets, and they will found an adventuring company instead and put it to use that way, and then ultimately probably become landed. We'll see, obviously, what they decide to do with all that money. If a poor character ends up in the pool of potential characters, but they have a particularly interesting personality, or even just claims, then they may also become a landless adventurer, just somewhat of a poorer one. They'll have a little bit more of a road to prosperity in the future. And then the last way you can become landless is the classic way, I suppose. Losing your last title, of course. You could just lose your last title. Previously, the game would have ended, but now you can choose to become a landless adventurer. Unless you're an admin family, then you can become a governor, all that kind of stuff as well. But if you are not in an admin realm, you become unlanded, and you can choose to continue if you want to, or if you are the AI, they will sometimes decide to do this as well. If they have the traits that suits it, I imagine if they're brave, something like that, they're going to have more chance to become landless. If they are cowardly, craven, probably not going to become landless. Their game, if you want to think of it, will end at that point as well. This can be the result of title revocation, conquest, or even exile. If a character's last title is stripped away and they're either a player or a suitably driven individual, they will see a pop-up to become an adventurer. Once and former king in this example, and this is some fantastic art. Again, with all the updates to Crusader Kings, the art team just always knocks it out of the park. So does the music team. To be honest, they all do, but the art especially looks fantastic, and this is a great example of it here as well. And then what is the flip side of that? That's how you become landless. Well, how do you become landed once you are landless? The problem with becoming an adventurer is how do we make it more accessible without requiring people to jump through hoops to become landed again? So the problem, as we saw, is how to become an adventurer without requiring too much. There's all those different ways you can become landless if you want to, and also if you choose to do so at the beginning of the game. The flip side of that is obviously becoming landed, and how do they make this less accessible than immediately just relaunching a conquest war or discovering the first weak independent duchy that you see? So they want it to be easy to become an adventurer, but they don't want it to become too easy to become landed, where it kind of takes away a lot of the challenge of this. Although, as they will go into, there are some easier ways to become landed, but they don't want it to be so easy every time that there's no real challenge to it. So if moving out for adventuring is too easy, then it's got no narrative weight, and the difference between landed and landless isn't really felt that much. If it is too difficult to do it, however, it becomes a chore and a game mode that no one's going to play. I think I would agree with this. If it's too easy, it's no fun, and it won't really play out that differently. If it is too hard, people just aren't going to do it for the most part. They'll just stay as a landed character. What they've tried to accomplish with this then is a sliding scale of options to become landed. There are some easier ways and some harder ways. You probably can find a weak or terrible county somewhere that you can get without much effort, but if you want to become a king, etc., it is going to be a much more glorious pursuit. You're going to feel really some, sense of accomplishment, some pride and accomplishment, you could say, of really putting the work in and getting something really cool down the line. As with becoming a landless adventurer, there are many ways to do this, as we've already been saying, some violent, some not so violent, and some religious, not so religious as well. The big thing in common, however, is that the size of the realm you're trying to acquire is gated by your prestige level. Adventurers with less fame are at best upstarts, and no matter how much gold or troops they have, they won't be seen as legitimate kings or dukes or something like that. So they have used prestige as some kind of gating, prevent you becoming landless and then just taking over as an emperor or something like that in a really easy way. Well, it wouldn't be easy anyway, but they don't want you really just jumping the scales without really putting the work in, as they were just mentioning through all of that. So leaving the road behind, how do you leave the adventuring world and become a landed character? Adventurers inheriting land immediately lose their camp, with partial refunds as mentioned in last week's Dev Diary, and a shift into their new realm. For the purpose of inheritance, adventurers are counted as landless courtiers, so they aren't excluded by higher crown authority, so you can't kind of lose the potential of inheriting somewhere just because you are landless. For those of us, however, that don't want to just randomly be inherited back into some land, they have introduced the Gallivanter trait, obtainable via inheritance decision. They're going to cover this later on, but basically this allows you to disinherit yourself from any titles. I think it is higher than the one you currently have. Again, it is later on in the Dev Diary. They're going to cover this in some detail, but this will prevent you from inheriting lands if you're landless. It will also, as a bit of a spoiler, prevent you from becoming the Emperor of the HRE if you don't wish to do so. So again, we'll cover that later on, but that is a cool feature as well. The next way you can do so is Adventurer Invasions. Adventurers cannot access most Casus Belli. Legitimists may use the claim Casus Belli, but that is a bit of a niche case for that example, as that is all about trying to get a kingdom back that you've lost, and your choice of target is naturally constrained to the ones you have previously had, or that you had a claim on directly. As you have no realm priest, you cannot fabricate new claims on command, nor would anyone take you seriously if you did. So yeah, you haven't got some dude in the back, you haven't got a Little John or someone back there making up claims for the Kingdom of France, and even if they did, no one would believe you. They'd just be like, oh, it's that drunk guy from down the road saying he's got a claim on France. Just shut up and go away and leave us alone. Instead, landless wanderers have access to a new Adventurer Invasion Casus Belli, which works fairly similar to some of the other Invasion Casus Bellis, but with some minor changes. You can select an existing title held by a character or one of their vassals and conquer or usurp anything within that title. If this is their only top-tier title, you attempt to conquer the realm as a whole. Naturally, any rule achieved this way is extremely illegitimate, so that's going to work into the legitimacy system, and you're going to start with a very bad score in that. You're going to have to build it up as quick as you can to see any short-term success. The caveat here, as mentioned, is that they gate this behind your prestige level. Targeting a county only requires you to be distinguished, a duchy needs illustrious, a kingdom requires exalted amongst men, and an empire mandates that you are a living legend. Again, if you are a living legend, an amazing mercenary captain or something, maybe they would see you as legitimate if you were able to defeat somebody. And you can see here a very bad example. This guy trying to take on the Byzantines. You are going to lose this war. You've got 151 men. He's got nearly 4,000. It isn't going to work out that well for you, but you can do this if you had the requirements to do so. As adventurers don't have too many prestige outflows, as they do work differently to normal characters, they've made these Casus Belli extremely expensive. You can, of course, get discounts via lifestyle perks, cultural traditions, all the usual ways as a landed character, but going from 0 to ruler is something you will really need to save up for. Finally, they are currently testing porting over some mechanics from the Seas Realm scheme, more on that later on in the Dev Diary, into the Adventurer Invasion Casus Belli that will cause some large realms to fragment, with various vassals declaring unilateral independence in response to your assault. They're not 100% sure if this is going to make it to release, they're just designing it at the moment and really seeing whether it works and if it's fun. So it sounds like if this is good, we might not get it immediately, maybe this will be in the next free patch after launch, so some like additional content we might get later on. This sounds like an interesting one, though. The next one is Sponsored Invasions. Of course, not every adventurer is determined to carve out a realm for their own. If you're smart, or at least a little humble, then you can help your odds by finding a sponsor. This is usually a king or higher who will pledge either to loan you soldiers or fight by your side. Should you win, your legitimacy won't be quite as bad either, so you're going to start a little bit more legitimized because another king or an emperor has kind of sponsored your taking over of that realm. So other people will see that you're probably pretty cool because this other king has kind of stuck their neck out for you and said you should be that ruler. So again, a cool little system there. And you can see here, request invasion sponsorship, a bunch of options, request soldiers, join war, offer gold. So there are different ways you can get support off them. In exchange, though, you will become the sponsor's vassal on success. A small price to pay, though, for some security and aid, surely. I think that is mostly a good trade-off there. It'd be a cool way to expand another realm as well. If you see the Byzantines, maybe you want to give them a bit of Italy or something. You do this, become the emperor's vassal, and then obviously kill him off and take his throne later on. Finding a sponsor requires a prestige level of illustrious, but as you can imagine, most rulers are quite open to the idea of gaining a bit of free land, so it isn't too difficult to find somebody to use. They don't need your help with lesser realms, so you can achieve sponsorship for a kingdom or empire title. So I guess if you take over an empire for a sponsorship from another emperor, I guess you get demoted to a king. Obviously, you can't have tiered empires, so I guess, yeah, if you're the emperor of the Byzantines, you somehow get a sponsored invasion of the HRE, I suppose. It sounds like that is technically possible. If you won, I guess you become like the king of Germany or something, and you become his vassal at that point. Obviously, you can't be the emperor of the HRE under the emperor of the Byzantines, so we will have to see a little bit more clarification on that in the future. Going through those, they're probably the ways you thought you could become landed. There are obviously other ways, however. The next one is direct purchase, so inside feudal, clan, or even tribal realms, you've got the direct route of cold hard coin. A county is somewhat affordable, but purchasing a duchy will cost you a fortune, and no character will ever sell you a kingdom. You can see here, purchase land. Purchasing land from a ruler is reasonably circumstantial, but still doable. They won't part with their land for just any reason, especially if those lands are dear to them. The wealthier a county or duchy is, the more closely it aligns with their faith and culture, and the further away from the capital it is, the more that is going to add to like a negative chance of getting this land. And even doubling the amount of gold you could offer them isn't going to sway them to giving you that land. So pretty much like if they really see it as part of their land, they own it directly, or it is very aligned with their culture or religion, they're probably not going to sell it to you anyway. But if it is outside of that, or if they're greedy or something like that, I imagine they're more likely to sell you some land. And as you can see in that example we're already showing, it is a lot to buy this. You also gain stress because you're greedy. You don't really want to give away your money, but you are doing so. So it is going to be stressful to do this. And you can see obviously everything else that happens. And in this one, you can see pay double. I'm going to try give you more money to try make you accept this. And even then, he says no. He says, nope, I'm keeping Georgia for myself. Thank you very much for the offer, but I'm busy with this land. Go away, please, and leave me alone. Of course, if you are very far from home, you can always try a sway scheme, perhaps adopt the local faith, or even learn the target's language, as well as offering more money or picking a less valuable place to live. Alternatively, you can find a realm or kingdom with less ties to all its people and see who will sell you their plot, or look for a frontier region where people don't match their current ruler. So again, depending on your faith, culture, all these kind of things, the language that you speak, you are going to have easier options or harder ones, depending on what you're trying to do during your campaigns. Providing your new business partner is a higher tier than you will buy in as their vassal. So you don't buy this and become independent. You are their vassal. That obviously makes sense to me. And then as we saw with the earlier dev diaries on Roads to Power, the admin system does work differently, and setting up an administrative family does work differently to becoming a landless adventurer. The great magnates have their estates, sure, but they don't directly own entire counties the same way as other rulers do, so that's why it has to work differently. Instead of purchasing a title from an admin realm directly, you can acquire permission to purchase a sizable estate of your own, turning yourself into another one of the realm's great families. And from here, you will play the influence game, play that admin game style as normal, although you will enter as a bit of an outsider for some time. There are some modifiers you pick up from becoming landed, and within admin realms, that is going to probably affect you a little bit worse. But you can do this. You can enter the admin realm game and carry on your adventures that way. Again, you can see that in the screenshot here. You pay the money, all your camp buildings are destroyed. The conquerors of Barbastro are destroyed, so that's what your company is called. You found a new noble family, you become the head of it, and you become its vassal, all that stuff, and then you play the admin government game. Again, that was covered in the earlier dev diaries on Roads to Power. They are on the channel if you have missed those at the time. You can bribe him, you can use your prestige, you can assure him with piety, all these different ways you can start getting into the lowest runs of that power system. This is overall actually quite a bit easier than finding somebody to sell you a discrete title. You're simply investing your wealth in property, and no one really believes a foreigner will thrive in the cutthroat world of admin politics. Naturally, a requirement for any prospective subject is that they adopt the state faith. If you don't meet the state's requirement for citizens, you're just a dirty barbarian, especially to those Roman types. They do believe that to be the case. The next way you could do it, and this is one that I kind of thought about last week and wondered if you could do this, and that is Great Holy War beneficiaries. Uniquely, adventurers may choose themselves as the beneficiary in Great Holy Wars. This means a suitably vicious mercenary company could, under the right circumstances, transition to be a very effective Kingdom of Jerusalem. That is going to make some fantastic campaigns. Having these, as they say here, bloodthirsty mercenary gangs. I'm going to settle down and find God and run the Kingdom of Jerusalem very successfully. It isn't going to fall apart. That never happens with that kingdom once it's founded. That is a fantastic way to play out one of these campaigns, I would imagine. A holy band of brothers really trying to take advantage of the Pope and get a kingdom out of it. And that is some of the proactive ways you can gain land. There is another way, and that is that a ruler actually comes to you and says, do you want a settlement? And that can happen. So as a landed ruler, you don't have to wait for an adventurer to approach you about your domain, whether they're carrying sword or silver. You can, if you wish, try to settle them yourself. This does require for them to be presently camped in your realm or at war with you, which is interesting. This allows you to both retain an adventurer who may have won a tournament you hosted. So yeah, I suppose if an adventurer wins a tournament and you think, wow, this guy looks awesome, let's get him landed, and then I can use him in my council or something like that, or as a commander. Or you can sabotage an opponent's mercenary army by rewarding them with territory. So again, that is an awesome option. So if they have one of these mercenary companies and they send them into your realm to try help them, you can actually go to that captain and say, hey, I know he's paid you to invade me, but why don't I give you this county over here? And why don't you settle down and let's not do all of this kind of stuff? And he might say, yep, go on then. I'll do that instead. I'm going to keep the money from the first guy, and then you're going to let me settle, and it's going to be happy times all round. Unless you obviously still lose that war, and then that will be pretty funny anyway. Other than the land that you give away, this will also cost you legitimacy. I think that does make sense. You're kind of giving a random guy some land. But provided you can give them a low-level title, the newly minted lordling will become your vassal, so that does make sense. He stays within your realm, and then you get to make use of him and his merry band of people he brings along with him as well. And then last of all, this is using the new redone scheme system. Again, they're not going to talk about that too much. I think that's going to be next week's Dev Diary or the one after, where they're going to give us a full breakdown of how that new system works. But the next one is Seize Realm Scheme. This is extremely powerful because it allows you to usurp another realm in a high-stakes coup, although with difficult requirements. The target's tier has the same requirement logic as the Adventure Invasion Casus Belli, although it cannot target admin realms themselves, so you will need to have accrued a lot of prestige. Additionally, getting agents to support, you'll also probably take a fair bit of cash and assorted other resources, but with such a prize on the line, it may be worth doing this. The major caveat for attempting to seize realm is that there will be those who resist. You may seize the throne, but especially in large realms with hefty cultural and religious fault lines, many parts of the realm are likely to splinter away, generally not enough to render your effort pointless, but enough to really make you think about whether it's worth the effort to put into this. So it looks like you do claim the title, but at the same time, the other realms in there can potentially split away, even if you are successful. So that is an interesting version of this. And you can see here on this map of France, after a successful seize realm scheme, an adventurer whose prestige level was at least exalted finds a large portion of their realm splintered off after their usurpation. So they've kept that bit of France, but then Aquitaine, Toulouse, Burgundy, Auxerre, they've all split away and said, yep, we're not part of you. We don't see you as the legitimate king of France. We're going to go off and do our own thing. Nothing you can do about it unless you come and conquer us later on. So that is most of the ways you can become landed. Obviously, once you become landed, what happens then? Well, the day after that has happened, these are the changes you'll see. So after you've become landed, you will gain a newly relocalized veteran adventurer trait. This is the former adventurer trait and reflects your learnings and life experiences from your life outside the strictures of landed life. This is to help you have a little bit of a foot up at the beginning so you don't just take over somewhere and immediately run into issues. You are going to have issues, but this helps you a little bit anyway. Because that trait has some fairly powerful bonuses they don't want to reduce or balance around, they've made a trait that rewards you for concluding your journey rather than a welcoming prize for merely settling out of it. So I can see how it would be hard to balance having this trait that works great for landless, and then when you become landed, you don't just keep it, because I imagine the bonuses are pretty crazy. So it is a kind of like a rebirth of that trait for your character that will take the best of what you did and give you some bonuses. On top of that, your camp is liquidated, returning a portion of the gold you spent on it. So if you do have a large camp, when you do settle, you're going to have a lot of money when you first settle down, and you keep the followers you had, they will now become courtiers. Your former comrades will all get a simple trait that lets you know who was with you in the wilderness. So they all get the follower fame trait, +1 diplomacy, opinion of follower characters, and opinion of veteran adventurer characters +20. So that is pretty cool. You get to actually see who came along with you, who settled down, and then if they go off on other adventures, you actually get to see who they came from. You can see here, Roussel spent time in Duke Robert's camp when he was a veteran adventurer. So I imagine you're going to see this on other characters as well. You can pick somebody up and you can see where he came from previously. That is pretty cool. Getting that little bit of lore, I guess, about different characters. And with that, that's the end of the first part of the dev diary. That's how you become landed, how you become landless, all those different kind of things, how your camp works a little bit. Again, that's going to be covered again a little bit further down this dev diary, a very long dev diary again this week. The next bit they're going to talk about is becoming a mercenary. And I think this is how most of you are going to play a landless character. So they're going to go over the differences between a landless adventurer and a mercenary adventurer. And with how you earn gold, they've also tried to emphasize the composition of an adventuring army is a bit different to normal landed play, again, to differentiate how this plays to normal characters. Their troops are much more likely to be veteran fighters and bandits semi-consistently, so they have a much greater emphasis on men-at-arms. Obviously, you're not going to be levying troops from around places if you're a traveling mercenary band. They also have the ability to pick up fighters wherever they go, and they don't have access to levies or lesser noblemen to fill out their units, as we were just saying. You have to pick them up through events and other ways as well. The Swords for Hire camp purpose is obviously specialized in this type of gameplay, but both freebooters and amazingly scholars can make a pretty good go at it. They're just going to be slightly worse, but if you're trying to do some smaller conflicts, you're going to be okay with those. But you are going to want to be a Swords for Hire for the more impressive feats during this kind of gameplay. So getting started as a mercenary, as standard, adventurers buy troops in the usual manner from the military screen. Various buildings in their camp increase how many mercenaries you can get. They showed that off last week. So you rarely find an adventure with just a pavilion and no other camp buildings around it. Mercenaries just getting started will likely want to pick a few non-warfare contracts to begin with, so this will give them some foundational gold, provisions, also will grow their role of patrons, and as we saw last week, patrons can give you money, troops, all those kind of things, so that will help you later on. Patrons are uniquely useful because you can request they provide you with men-at-arms regiments, and they're going to go onto that later on, helping you fill out your company's basic building blocks. So that is how you can pick up these regiments, and as they said again last week, you can pick up the cultural ones as well, so you can explore the world and pick up all these cultural ones as well, and have like a really weird ragtag army if you want to. And that is what they're going to go into next. Elephants. Elephantry are recruitable only if you have the Elephantry Reserve upgrade for the Proving Grounds camp building, or are lucky enough to receive them from a patron. This can only be built in a region where tameable elephants are available, so that's in India or Southeast Asia. If you want elephants, and who doesn't, you're going to have to go and get them. You can't just pick them up wherever you want. So as you can see here, you have to travel to that part of the map, pick up the elephants, and you can take those on your adventures later on. I'm sure it works the same for camels and all the other kinds as well. Once you have settled down, and especially as a mercenary character, you are going to have these ongoing expenses. So unlike landed characters or even tribals, adventurers don't pay to maintain their troops. It is assumed that they're getting paid partially in provisions, as they are deducted as you really go out on these kind of major expeditions, partially in loot they take as you move, and partially in a share of gold paid by your contract givers. As with not expending provisions when not traveling, they basically came to this resolution because there were times when they were playing characters in testing where they would have a bit of a feast or famine effect with gold, and if you had to pay your mercenary band, you could find yourself just suddenly out of troops when you couldn't pay them, and it became very frustrating to actually play a mercenary character. So I'm sure some of you may think it's very weird that you don't have to pay your mercenary army month by month, but I think it does make sense here. I can only imagine the weird areas you get into where you have a lull in getting gold or something and your mercenary camp fell apart. I guess that is kind of historically how it would have happened, but I do agree that gameplay-wise, it would have been very annoying to play and probably would have put people off playing this game mode. So it is kind of abstracted away into these other systems that you have, so you don't have to worry about it separately as well. As we talked about in last week's dev diary, obviously having an army is again going to work a little bit differently because you don't have land to pick up peasants from to resupply your army. There are no burghers, there are no other subjects to pick on. So when building an army, that is a bit of a problem because who's going to be a soldier for some guy in a tent? So yeah, you have no way to just naturally rebuild your army through the lands that you own because you don't own any. You're just some dude in a tent down the road saying, hey, come join my army. And they're going to go, no, my liege is going to be very annoyed if I do that. So instead of reinforcing automatically, which would mean drawing from a reserve that they don't have, adventurers have a pair of interactions they can use to reinforce their armies by paying different sorts of currency. The most cost-effective is obviously gold. This is one way you can recruit people, but you can do it as well through just provisions. I wonder if there's some kind of modifier if you use provisions rather than gold. As the interactions do have a short cooldown of a couple of years, adventurers can generally bounce back from 1 or 2 bad battles before you really start having some issues about keeping your mercenary band actually productive. The cost of either of these options scale with the amount of troops you're missing. If you do lack sufficient gold or provisions to rebuild your forces, you can partially reinforce with whatever you have lying around, so you can kind of just fill up as best you can and then take those and try have some adventures elsewhere, or keep doing, as they've mentioned already, a couple of these contracts that aren't military focused that you will still receive, build up some more gold, and then finish rebuilding your army. You can gradually do this if you don't have a bunch of cash lying around. Of course, if you don't have any gold or provisions, you can try conscript people on the cheap with a men-at-arms decision, scrape the barrel. Here, as you can see in the screenshot, you can try a diplomacy prowess check, try just convince people to join you. You can pay prestige, you can pay piety, or you can just use your dread to try kind of scare people into joining your mercenary group. So again, 4 different ways you can do this: through your stats, through gold, through piety, or through your dread, and try, as I said, scare people to join you. A few soldiers is better than none, and some resources like dread are much cheaper than others, so scraping the barrel can now and then be a very good idea. Several lifestyle perks also make this even more efficient, so this is a way, especially later on when you've got a lot of lifestyle perks, where potentially you could use this to just gradually reinforce things small bits at a time and not have to go down the gold route or one of the other ones that is kind of more expensive. You can just force people in a way to join you if you have the ability to do so. The next thing they're going to talk about is impressment and wartime recruiting. Now, they actually say here they did have some other options, but they ended up being a little bit too micromanaging, trying to kind of pick people up a lot of the time as you're fighting. It just ended up being not that fun and really not worth the effort really putting in. So to compensate for this, they've given adventurers a little mechanic called siege replenishment. After you win a siege, they replenish their men-at-arms by soldiers equivalent to the holding's loot value ×2. This represents new volunteers, impressed locals, and fresh mercenaries flocking to a victorious banner. So yeah, if you win a siege, as they mentioned last week, you do get additional bonuses as a landless character, but then also it does allow you to replenish your army as people see you as a glorious character and they're going to come join you and have some adventures as well. This means that as an adventuring army that is doing well and is winning a lot of sieges, you kind of have a little bit of self-healing, a little bit of self-replenishment, so your forces won't die off quite as easily as they would have done without this system. It's not going to replenish fully the people that you lose most of the time, but it is going to allow you to have these kind of longer campaigns where you're sieging places down. And as they point out at the end here, this did enable them to have some army reinforcement without crazy levels of micromanagement. You can almost ignore the ones above and really use this to replenish your army. Not the most efficient way, but a way that is possible to do so. Next, we're going to go back to the camp system, and this time a mercenary camp. The 2 most valuable buildings that almost any mercenary camp will want to help them manage themselves are the Proving Grounds and the Roaring Campfire, as well as likely either the baggage train or the mess tent, or for large companies, potentially you will have both of these. The Proving Grounds contain numerous upgrades for improving your men-at-arms types. Each of those also unlock a captain officer that will further boost these types of units. It also has several situational upgrades for improving ancillary parts of the sellsword experience. Some of these were covered last week, but they are going to show them off again here. So this is the Proving Grounds, Lockwagon, Martial Study, and the Stick Game. Classic stick game there. And as you can see, they do give different bonuses depending on which one you build, but you can, by the sounds of it, end up building all of these if you do want to. The Roaring Campfire doesn't contain any upgrades for individual types of men-at-arms, but it does increase the number of knights and men-at-arms regiments that you can have overall as you level up through the system. So this allows you to just have more troops, and that will help you obviously snowball into better and better experiences. And then in this screenshot, you can see the baggage train. Both the baggage train and the mess tent improve your ability to acquire and store provisions, more or less required for larger companies. Obviously, if you don't have the provisions needed, once you get your company large enough, you're not going to be able to traverse the map, and then you're going to get stuck in a certain place without those provisions built up. The baggage train has a wide variety of upgrades, some for provisions and some focused entirely elsewhere. Where that is, I guess it's up to us to find out. While the mess tent focuses significantly more on improving the provision acquisition, so you can get those provisions easier, you can store them, and then you can send your armies around the map that little bit easier. The bonuses adventurers can get from their camps do potentially give them a powerful edge in warfare, as they have to, given this is the major thing you spend your gold on outside of traveling. So something they've tried to emphasize with this is the idea that you're going to be a little bit of a glass cannon or glass longbow, as they joke here, where yes, you can fight very well, but if you do badly, it is going to be a very bad time for your campaign. It's going to be a lot harder than being a landed character where you can generally reinforce your army relatively quickly. This way, yes, your armies are going to be very good, but if you lose, you're going to have a very bad time if that does happen. So pound for pound, a dedicated, well-built adventure camp can hit harder than most other armies, but they will have trouble recuperating from serious losses, as we just talked about. They can accrue many bonuses from camp upgrades, but over time their reinforcement costs really do start to add up. Their troops are powerful and they will have access to different types of men-at-arms. Again, the different cultural ones and things like that you can pick up. But they will then be paying provisions through the nose just to transport them around the map. Their knights can be deadly, but they don't have a steady stream of replacements if they do lose them. So it goes as the life as a humble mercenary. So yes, the mercenary system, Looks very, very cool from everything we've seen so far. And again, you are going to be this glass cannon, very powerful, especially once you build up these upgrades. But again, if you do start losing your knights, you start losing your captains, you start losing your troops in general, it's going to get harder and harder to replenish them. And the larger your forces are, the more and more it's going to cost you to do so. So you are going to have to be a little bit wary as to what battles you pick, especially once you've built these up. Next, of course, you've built up your mercenary army. Well, what do you actually do with it? How much sword can a sword sell? Are we playing Monkey Island or are we playing Crusader Kings? I do like that title there. When an adventurer joins a war or wars for employers engaged in multiple fronts, they are brought in as a wartime ally in control of their own troops. At the end of the war, they are awarded gold based on the contribution score they provided. So you can see this very much working like Crusades, where you get rewarded based on the tier of action you actually took. But how do you actually become involved in someone else's conflict? Most obviously, they can join ongoing wars via the Stand With Us contract. This appears on the map as usual, put out as a passive call by rulers without anyone specific in mind. These wars can be more or less any kind of war. Not all wars are ongoing when a merc gets involved though. The Press My Claims contract involves a claimant contracting you out to help them to start a war. So yes, you can join wars that are already happening, or somebody can hire you to really get ready to start a war. And the first one they're going to show us here is Stand With Us. This is one where it is a progressing war already. And I guess you've got to balance out, like, how well is this war going? Can I turn the tide for this person? Because if they do lose this war, potentially they wouldn't be able to pay you anyway, so that wouldn't really be worth spending your kind of hard-earned soldiers on. If it looks like a war where you think you can turn the tides in their favor, you're going to get a lot of rewards based on your war contribution. They will be added to your wall of patrons, so you'll be able to go and shake them down later on for additional troops and provisions. And you also get a weak hook on them as well, so you can put that to some advantages as well. But that isn't the only kind of wars you can join. Yes, the faction game is still here, but this time you're actually getting paid by a faction to join them and actually help them launch the faction against a ruler. Now, this might be a little bit annoying. There's many times where you see factions and you're like, they're at like 40%. I don't need to worry about them. They're never going to be strong enough. I guess if they do hire somebody, then they could quickly jump high enough to start a faction against you. So you are going to have to take notice of these a little bit more potentially than you do already. So support a faction. This is one where a count has come up and said, hey, the Duke here, we don't like him. Let's start a Liberty faction and I'm going to pay these mercenaries to come and help us. And similar to the one above, you get gold based on your war contribution. It becomes one of your patrons and you also get a weak hook on him as well. So similar kind of outcome. But this is one where you're helping a faction within a realm rather than an actual war between realms themselves. A more esoteric way is to use the offer military assistance interaction from Fate of Iberia. This was part of the free patch, so you don't need to worry about having that DLC if you don't. You will still get this option. This will proactively join an ongoing war that hasn't put out a contract yet. So if there is a war that you think looks extra juicy, that you might be able to get some rewards from, you can go to one of the rulers and say, can I join your war? This will generally pay worse than a normal contract, but it does help you shape the map a little bit more easily. And if you want to support this little realm or screw over a former snobbish employer, you can use this interaction. So again, this is a pretty cool one. A little bit of flavor here. Maybe you get defeated by somebody. Maybe there's just somebody you really hate for some reason, and you see a war get declared on them, and you can actually go and say like, hey, can I join that war? I really don't like that guy, and I just want to help you out a little bit. You're not going to get as good rewards, but you get the satisfaction of defeating a certain character that you might not like. Finally, out of all of these, Mercenary Adventurers can be hired directly with a new Special Mercenaries tab in the military view. This acts roughly like the Stand With Us contract, but is player accessible, meaning you can hire adventurers to wage your wars without having to like put out the contract on the map. Obviously, as a player, you just say, hey, mercenaries, I want to hire some of you, and you can be able to do it this way instead. So they will join you in this war, and then you have to pay them obviously based on how well they do. So if you are losing very badly, maybe you don't want to pick up some soldiers elsewhere, you can pick up this option instead and have a mercenary company have some fun for you. The next bit, this has been mentioned a few times during all the recent dev diaries, and that is biting the hand that feeds. Yes, if you are hired on one side of a war, you are sellswords. You can actually change and switch sides to the other side. All it costs is reputation and a semblance of trust with your old employer. But if it's a precarious army at risk, then maybe it is worth doing this. In exchange for this, your new ally will let themselves be added as a patron, and they may even pay you a small bounty for the act of treachery, though the original contract will be failed. So obviously you can't pick up the contract rewards for the one that you just switched sides from, but the new employer, he might give you some additional bonuses as well. I guess if you're in a war that is especially going badly and you're thinking, well, I'm not going to get anything out of this, I'm going to switch sides. And as long as it isn't too lopsided, I guess the other side will pay you some reward for doing so. Treacherous and cowardly adventurers may opt to simply leave the war altogether. There are no real benefits to do this and various downsides, but if you're done with the conflict you have no ties to, well, you can just duck out of it and leave it. I guess if a war's kind of dragging on and you don't want to carry on spending up your troops, or maybe you see that the guy that's going to win that was your benefactor maybe won't be able to pay you or something. I'm not too sure. I guess it's probably cutting your losses, not just losing more troops for no benefit. If you think it's just going to peter out into nothing, you can just get out of there and get on to some other adventures instead. But that covers the general gameplay of a mercenary company, how you do things, how you can be picked up, how you can earn rewards, all those kind of things. And now, as we've seen a bit of a yo-yo in this dev diary, we keep covering alternate things. So that was the warfare side, how to do those things. We're now going to go back to the camp side, and that is officers. Most court positions weren't suitable for adventurers, even the name doesn't really work. So instead, they've reflavored the mechanic from court positions to camp officers, with the idea being that your officers are actually tasked with doing jobs you set for them day to day, rather than boast about a title or collect a little pay as you would do as a landed character. A few court positions do carry over: your physician, your caravan master, and your bodyguards, but others were disabled. These are ones that just don't make sense as a landless character. Since adventurers do not have a steady source of gold, officers are not paid in gold to avoid bankruptcies. It's assumed their pay comes from provisions and other deductibles from your contracts, so very similar to your mercenary army. They've tried to tie officers into event content and into contracts, especially skill-based ones, so making sure you have the best people in these positions will help you outside of their passive modifiers. So you are going to have events where you can call in an officer to help you. And then the roll call. So every adventurer has access to at least 2 officers by default. The second, who is your second in command, and the stooge. I like that, the stooge there. Your second in command gives you a broad range of skills based on their aptitude, similar to a jacked up spouse. It's an interesting way of saying it. They also substitute in for scheme discovery in place for spy master, since adventurers have no counsel. The stooge is your equivalent of a court jester, except jesters at least have some interesting privileges and a level of access to a noble figure. A stooge is simply just a person in the camp that everyone hates. The stooge can be humiliated to lose stress, though everyone has their limits with this type of thing. So yeah, you'd literally just have like a lower tier court jester that you can kind of abuse, I guess, for a little bit of enjoyment, if that's your kind of thing. Courtier wounded your child, make them a stooge. Officer screwed up your contract, demoted to stooge. Childhood bully still in your camp? You're right, they're getting stoogified. So again, you can make anyone this if you want to. Otherwise, officers are generally unlocked by different camp buildings and upgrades, with a few of them being specific to certain camp purposes. Rather than go into explanations of each one, they're just going to show you them all here, so we're going to show them on the screen for a second. As always, I will leave a link to this in the description down below, so if you do want to read about these later on, you can see them in your own time. As such, we're just going to pick out a few of them. So you can see the armourer here. He helps your men-at-arms toughness. You can see the master thief. He increases secrecy schemes and things like that. Your head groom, he increases travel speed, army movement, all those kind of things as well. The kenneler here, this improves your night effectiveness and also enables toss to dogs execution prisoners method. So you can just have your prisoners thrown to the dogs. And let's not think about what happens to them after that happens. And as you can see, a bunch more here, all giving you bonuses around different things, unlocking interactions, unlocking decisions, bonuses around most of these features as well. Similar to how, as they've said, the court positions work, but retooled into the system where it makes more sense. Finally, they also have a selection of officers that improve your men-at-arms, discussed a little in the mercenary section above that we covered already. These aren't heavily integrated into content, but do give mercenary adventurers that little extra edge. Each of them is unlocked by a relevant building in your Proving Grounds camp building. As your captains are likely to also be knights, their powerful bonuses are also weighed against their possible death in battle. And you can see here, these all make sense. A cavalry captain, an elephant captain, a horse archer captain, and these obviously boost those areas of your army and give you additional regiments and additional modifiers to those troops as well. So again, if you lose one of these, maybe you'll want to retool your army a little bit, or maybe pick one up if you have an army that has these types of units. As we mentioned so long ago at the beginning of the video, there are also a bunch of new decisions coming as part of this system, and we're going to go through a few of those in this coverage as well. So as you can see here, we have a new decisions and contracts section. You can see major adventurer decisions, just major decisions on their own, adventurer decisions, and just general decisions that you would get anyway for a type of character. So you can see immediately which ones cover what kind of content. So the major decisions they're bringing in: become a great conqueror. Sometimes a mercenary has to ask themselves a simple question. Why am I fighting for this noble? Why is my neck on the line for the 100th time for people who look down on me? Why do I bleed for their glory? You are helping them in their battles. You're not actually getting that much out of them, really, for the amount of work you put into it. Some will shrug their shoulders and accept it as just the way things are. There are those, however, that will refuse this and try to make their own history. Becoming a great conqueror allows you to access the great conqueror mechanic detailed in a previous dev diary. I will leave a link to that in the description down below. It's an arduous road to match enough of the requirements, but at the end of it, if you do so, you will get a powerful reward. So become a great conqueror. Some fantastic art here again. I think this is from an earlier DLC, to be honest, but maybe I'm incorrect, but I'm sure I've seen that art before. So the effects of this is once you become landed, you will gain the Conqueror trait. That will give you some fantastic bonuses. You'll get an army of seasoned veterans consisting of retinue lancers and retinue vanguard. That will help you, obviously, once you become landed to stay landed. You'll gain the Greatest Conqueror Legend seeds. This is going to build into the legend system. You get a press claim on the Duchy of Bohemia. You start a war against the Duke for that title, and he will obviously lose some opinion on you because he doesn't want you taking his land. And then the requirements, as you can see in the next screenshot, these are pretty big. You need at least 8 of the following to be true. Your martial needs to be at least 22. Your level of fame needs to be legendary figure or above. So that is pretty difficult. All of these have to be true. You need to be a strategist and gallant. So again, you need to be a certain type of character. You have participated in at least 20 wars. You have participated in at least 5 wars against a king or an emperor. At least one of the following has to be true. You need to have at least 2 commander traits or a martial skill of at least 28. So again, these are pretty hard to hit. You need to have at least 4,000 soldiers. You need to have killed at least 12 characters. You need to have completed at least 20 raid for captive or stand for as contracts, and at least one of the following must be true. You need to have at least 6 knights with 18 prowess or higher, or at least 12 knights with 12 prowess or higher. So again, looking at these requirements, it's going to be pretty hard to hit. We don't really know how, like, end game, if you want to think about it, mercenary companies work, like how easy it is going to be to get these, but I can't imagine it's going to be too easy. Even the martial and prowess requirements are pretty hefty, and the other things I imagine you might be able to pick up just through normal gameplay, doing these contracts, things like that, and then getting people to join you, all those kind of things. So again, pretty hard to get hold of, but again, you're not going to want to be doing this every time, or you're not going to want to see other people doing this like constantly on the map. This needs to be something that's hard to do, and then you get fantastic rewards from doing it. The other way you can do it, that is obviously like the full martial way, just gaining land for yourself. The other way is the put your faith here path. So this is like the holy path for doing it. Missionaries were originally going to be one of the camp purposes, but that was changed as the scope was extremely early on in development, but it is a fantasy they didn't want to leave to die on the side. People kept bringing it up, little nods to them kept creeping into the other content, and that led them to this decision being added. With this decision, you can attempt to convert large numbers of counties to your faith, getting a shot at converting each time you travel to a new one, with sensible limits, of course. You can't just snake a new faith across the map. Once you've started this, you cannot turn it off, however. That is not God's way, but failure carries the risk of wounding each time. This makes death a likely consequence of overambition. Wait, so if you don't convert somewhere, you actually take a health penalty? I guess that's like you getting run out of the county from trying to convert them or something like that, I guess. This is not necessarily easy, but the path of a prophet never is. So you can be basically Jesus, I guess, if you pick this option. You gain the trait Zealous, you gain stress, because it is pretty stressful trying to convert people. For the next decade, you walk the path of a pious Catholic missionary. This obviously is for other religions as well. This is just the example they're showing. You will be able to convert counties you visit to Catholicism, either by the truth of your words or the might of your sword. Great peril awaits those who fail along the way, but only the worthy shall receive his reward in heaven. So yes, if you don't actually convert places, you're going to have a bad time. And as you can see, the requirements that are shown here, I believe there are some more, though. It looks like it scrolls down a little bit more, but at least 2 of the following must be true. You've completed pilgrimages to at least 2 holy sites. You have the trait Theologian. Your level of devotion is Paragon of Virtue or higher. Your current location must be a Catholic holy site ruled by a Catholic ruler. I guess that must say next. So again, a cool way to do it. You can travel to one of these holy sites, choose this option, and then try just converting a bunch of people. The next one is the Travels of Urist McVenturer. Here's one for explorers. Innumerable people have trekked from one end of the world to the other throughout history. Most of the time, these great travelers are forgotten with nothing to mark their passing, save perhaps a few foreign coins found centuries later in an unusual place, so nothing really to showcase what they got up to. The ones who remember long after their deaths are the nerds who stopped to write goddamn books about where they went. So yeah, the ones who actually took time to say, look, I went this place, I did this. This decision allows you to do this, creating a powerful lifestyle XP boosting book artifact for future generations proportional to the number of points of interest that you visited. So this is, I guess, a cool beginning one where you can do these travels. It's not going to cost you a great deal. You know, you don't have to build up an army and all of these things, But you can go on these adventures, pick up a really good artifact at the end, and then you can pass that down to your later generations. So the Travels of Robert Crispin, this obviously changes to the name of your character. You'll unlock a new lifestyle perk or create a book artifact that will increase the lifestyle experience gain for future holders. Every 12 visited points of interest up to 60 will increase the rewards this provides. And what are points of interest? They're those little places you can visit. It's usually like holy sites, capitals, things like that, where you can visit them on your travels on the map already. They usually give you lifestyle XP bonuses. In this case, you need to visit as many of them as you can to make your reward better and better. So you visited at least 26, at least 2 of the following must be true. You actually ended up visiting more than 42. Your level of fame is exalted amongst men, and you have 60 trade experience in Wondrous. So those are the requirements to finish this. I've seen Wondrous things, then I guess you choose between the lifestyle perk or an artifact, or I guess maybe it might be a dice roll. I imagine you actually get to choose which one you want, but I'm not too sure. It doesn't really call it out exactly here. The next thing you can do as a bit of a wander around the map, and this is kind of cool, you can actually become a landlord for other people. So you can found a holding, another decision that's great for explorers or a wanderer, which could easily be made to fit for even a Swords for Hire or freebooter. That is found a holding. Here you'll be able to leave your mark on a place that you have visited and gain passive income for your trouble, or maybe even steal a county out from under a local ruler. As this decision is repeatable, characters can found multiple holdings over a run of their campaign. So found a holding. During my travels, I've amassed sizable wealth. This fertile ground looks like a great place to invest in and reap the benefits for years to come. So with this, you actually build a castle in a location, and then you get a reward based on how good it is. As you can see here, for each year, the city will pay dividends. The amount depends on the number of combined building levels in this barony and the development of this county, from 50 up to 400 gold. So you can see, if you have a bunch of these around the map, you can actually earn quite a bit of income from having these. Obviously, they're going to be very expensive to build in the first place, and you can see that in the next screenshot. 1,000 gold for this example here. And you need to meet all these requirements. You can't do it all the time, but you can do it if you meet these requirements, and then you do get that passive income as you carry on. So especially early game, if you can do this somehow, it is going to be great for later on in the game. The next major decision you can take is the Knight of the Swan. For the chivalrously inclined, you are not left entirely in the cold. You can be an honorable traveling knight. This is going to be fantastic for Game of Thrones. I can't imagine what that mod is going to do with this system. Becoming a Knight of the Swan or a suitable local culture animal, so it will change depending on where you are, takes a pristine reputation and a lot of prestige, but it will net you a custom trait, permanent house modifier, beautiful artifact, and even a legend seed for the Legends of the Dead DLC owners. So again, here you can see Knight of the Swan. The effects of this is you get Knight Errand, you'll gain the Golden Code of the Swan artifact, you will gain a Knight of the Swan Legend Seed, and House Crispin becomes Swan Song. I guess that again changes, maybe Tiger Song or something like that if you're playing in Africa. And the requirements for this is your level of fame. You must have the Swords for Hire camp purpose. You do not have gallows bait. So if you have any kind of criminal activity, you can't do this. And you've completed at least 10 martial or prowess contracts of no criminal nature. So again, you do need to have done some kind of content to unlock this ability. But that isn't all. There are plenty more of these, and they are going to cover them all here. And this is Champion Your Culture. This is another decision that was going to be a camp purpose, but didn't really kind of fit in. They ran out of time to really add it. Maybe we'll get it in the future. And this one never really had a name, but think Vigilante meets Cultural Hero. Think Robin Hood if you led a rebellion, which, funnily enough, is what you're doing. Championing your culture allows you to break your countrymen free of foreign rule in a war for a single duchy, but one where you will get powerful bonuses to siege timing throughout and ready access to a swathe of event troops at the beginning. If you're clever, you can manipulate things so you don't even need to fight the fight. So this one's really cool. You can actually go around, I guess, look at the map mode, look for cultures that are ruled by someone who isn't the same culture, and then go to them and say, like, I'm going to champion you, I'm going to get you independence. I guess I potentially might get the land off you in the end as well. But this is like, hero of the downtrodden. And as you can see in this option, champion of the Norman culture, the land belongs to those who dwell in it. The kingdom of Bohemia must be ruled by a true Norman. You get a press claim on the Duchy of Bohemia. You start a war with a separatist uprising modifier for 15 years, which gives you some levies and men-at-arms. Or you do not start the war immediately, but you keep the claim that you can then implement later on. If you fulfill at least 3 of the following requirements, you will get the duchy peacefully. That is highborn Czech spouse. That obviously changes depending on where you're doing this. Catholic faith. That is obviously changing depending on where you are. Weak hook on the Kaiser. Friend of the Kaiser. Or at least 1 level of fame higher than the Kaiser. So again, these all modify depending on where you're trying to do this. But there are different ways to get it peacefully. So you can play the kind of intrigue game a little bit You can pick up a friendship with the Kaiser, maybe a weak hook by helping him in a contract, and then if you're also Catholic, that's 3 of them, and you'll get the duchy peacefully. So again, with this system, there are different ways for doing the exact same content. So you can do it through martial might or just having these different requirements instead. And then the requirements to launch this, you need to have the same culture as the county that you are trying to do this in. Your camp cannot be located in the county capital, and the liege of these lands isn't the same culture as the people you're trying to champion. So these are obvious requirements, I think, for this kind of content. So looking through all those, they're all like, I guess, like honorable ways you can do this, honorable decisions you can choose. Those not so honorable, those criminals amongst us, they do get a special decision as well. No one likes gallows bait. As you remember from part 1, these petty criminals are fit for the crows and nothing else. Of course, that is just the noble's point of view. For a true legend of the medieval underworld, there's something to be said for infamy, and plenty of fools amongst the ranks of the lost and damned will be drawn to serve the right master. So this is where you're a well-known criminal and people are going to come flock to you and you're going to have some adventures. With sufficient ranks of the petty criminal trait, you can take this decision in order to receive a small amount of event troops every time you successfully complete a criminal contract. The higher your various XP tracks, the more troops you earn. Amass an army of criminals that will find a lovely little island somewhere and take what should have been yours to begin with. So yes, you can pick up these troops steadily as you're doing these contracts. And then once you've got enough, you can do this decision and have some adventures. So I will become the master of the goodest son and daughters, an army of the most heinous scoundrels bound to my cause and whim to wreak havoc upon the weak and strong alike. So the effects of this decision is you gain the bandit's benefactor. Every time you complete an intrigue contract, you will gain a unique men-at-arms, as they just talked about, and the requirements, as you can see, a lot of requirements here. Well, you actually only need 3 of them. I guess ambitious and schemer are probably the ones that might lead you down this path anyway, but you can do it through the different kinds of gallows bait trade options. So you can just get this by being a bit of a criminal. You don't necessarily have to be the first 2. You can just do criminal things and earn the ability to pick this option as well. And with that, that is all the major decisions you can choose. As you can see, they are generally themed around different playstyles you can do as a landless character. It does give you something to kind of work towards as you're not doing the usual blobbing on the map and things like that. With the major ones out of the way, we move on to minor decisions. The first one of this is gather provisions. There's a few ways to gather provisions for your party. You can get them through contract rewards. You can visit a local township, more on that surely in the dev diary. You can go hunting or poaching, but the more frugal-minded among you will probably spend ample time just simply gathering provisions. This decision allows you, your chief forager if you have one, or your huntsman, to make a skill roll to try and acquire fresh provisions at no extra cost. The effectiveness depends heavily on the terrain you're in, with winter actually factoring into this slightly. I'm surprised it's slightly. I would have thought it would have a major modifier to it, but I guess we'll see once we get into the actual gameplay of it itself. And as you can see in this example, out trying to find a bounty in the lands and seeing how successful he is. They've kept this separate from the main hunting poaching activity to indicate tracking smaller, less managed game, using public areas, trapping and snaring rather than hunting larger game, legal, questionably legal, and grey but unlikely to be caught areas to go hunting, versus the primest, choicest woods to snag a doe. Essentially, that is the difference here. So this one you could do at any time. The other one, like hosting an actual hunting party, you do need to get permission from the ruler there. Otherwise, you do get seen as a poacher, and that sees you being a criminal and all that kind of thing as well. So this is like a scaled down version that you can always do no matter where you are. Next, it is the return of the stooge that we were talking about earlier. The stooge is a person at camp you detest, and if you're not the most compassionate of people, you can lose a lot of stress and earn a lot of dread by letting them know it as well. A slightly more psychopathic alternative to having a camp revel. Naturally, if you feel this is too mean-spirited, or there's no one at camp who has wronged you enough to get the job, filling the stooge position is entirely optional. Using the decision is doubly so. You don't have to do this if you don't want to. It's there if you want to use this, but it isn't intrinsic to do so. So, you know, if you don't want to do this, you don't have to. It's just an additional little thing you can do to lose some stress, gain some dread. So some of you, yes, I know you're going to be here mashing this button as often as possible. The next minor decision is reject inheritance and embrace responsibilities. As mentioned earlier in the dev diary, one of the traits they've added to the DLC is Gallivanter. This is essentially a voluntary disinheritance, allowing adventurers to stay as adventurers until they choose to change back to Landed. Content characters and those with a carefree lifestyle perk can also access this if they wish to do so. This comes at the cost of annoying your family, but that is a small price to pay for liberty. I believe that is probably true as well. So you can see here, reject inheritance. Again, that fantastic art here. You gain the trait Gallivanter, you lose 200 stress, you lose some opinion with your close family, and also I think the head of the family also loses additional opinion of you as well. Again, makes sense. You're kind of just leaving them behind and saying, I'm off to do whatever I want. And you need to have one of these perks available to pick this. Of course, if you do change your mind, you can choose to remove this trait virtually any time once, so you can't keep flip-flopping between it. You can do it once on that character and that's it. So I guess this is to prevent you kind of cheesing the system to avoid certain titles, pick up other ones, then pick it again, and keep having this kind of yo-yo effect. I think that is pretty cool that that happens. And then you can see here the trade itself. Gallivanter stress gain is lower, although the kind of UI makes it look like it's worse. It's just how it looks on the UI. Stress loss is better. Dynasty opinion -10. And then the other modifiers you can see here as well, and cannot inherit titles, obviously being the whole point of picking this option. Next, they're going to talk about the election candidacy status. They mentioned this at the beginning about like how this is going to help you play in the HRE without becoming the Emperor, and that is pretty much what this is for. They've seen that a lot of people have asked for this. There's so many people, if you go on the subreddit, saying like, I just want to play in the HRE and I don't want to be Emperor, but I always end up being voted in as the Emperor. This decision is going to allow you to not have that happen. You basically say, I don't want to be elected to a higher title. So if you're a king, you cannot be elected to the Emperor position. Somebody else will take that position instead. And what are the requirements for this? Well, it's simply, if you are a candidate, you can choose this and you will no longer be it. Now, as you can see in this UI as well, you can only change this every 20 years. So it looks like you can't, again, keep flip-flopping it forwards and backwards. You can change it and then you've got to wait 20 years to change it again. I presume to prevent kind of exploitation of this. And as you can see, the other effects here is that the Kaiser will lose opinion of you. He doesn't think you're, ambitious enough or something like that. Maybe he wanted you to take over and you're saying no, so he doesn't like you as much. And then every peer vassal who is not humble or content will also lose 25 opinion of you. So that isn't nothing. You will have to be careful with this. But if you are one of these players who doesn't want to become the Emperor, you're going to choose this every time, and then you can just continue in your adventures as a king or whatever, and just enjoy the gameplay you want to do. It's fantastic they finally added this. This has been a major call out pretty much ever since the game came out. So they are adding this. It isn't really directly linked to this gameplay at all, but it has been added and they wanted to call it out here. And the last thing they're going to call out here is go fishing. Yes, fishing minigame is upon us. And they do call out here, don't worry guys, this wasn't any time spent from the game team that could have been done on other content. This is pretty much where Paradox have like time set aside all the time for people to work on other things, do little things that maybe they think are cool that aren't part of the actual official expansion or something like that. Test out things that might be cool later on. He does call out here that the Jewish content that got added and the pet system was part of this kind of process they have, where people can kind of just brainstorm ideas, bring it to the team and say, look what I made on my kind of free time, if you want to think of it that way. Should we add it to the game? And they say yes or no. There's a bunch of other things as well that they call out, like UI and quality of life improvements that have come from this system. And they say here, like, yeah, this designer came to us with this fishing minigame. It wasn't that much work for us to add it in once they'd done it. So yes, there is a small minor decision to go fishing. It's fairly simple, but it is an extra way for adventurers to lose stress whilst also earning a few provisions. So I guess maybe you don't want to abuse your stooge. You can choose this, lose some stress, and also fish up some dinner for your motley group of people in your camp. But with all that, that is all the decisions you can choose, the major and the minor ones, and the going fishing as well. I do like that one. Let me know what you think in the comments down below of all those decisions. I think they are pretty cool, especially the minor ones. A little bit of flavor here and there, depending on what you're trying to do. The next thing is, again, similar to last week. They're going to go through an adventure a character has. I'm not going to go through this on the actual video. As I say, the video is already going to be like an hour and a half long or something. So I'm not going to go through all of this. I will leave a link, as always, in the description down below so you can read along it in your own time. This is basically another system they're bringing in, which is visit settlement. So as he says here, this is a big one. They're going to go through it all. But as you can see in this UI screenshot, you can actually visit the different parts of a county. So in this example, visit castle. You can visit the market. You can visit the tournament grounds, maybe is the third one. I'm not 100% sure the wheel is. But you can go here and then you'll get a string of events themed around that area. So think of this like the tournament UI, where you can visit the temple, you can visit the training grounds, and then you get events themed around that. This is kind of that system reimagined. You can visit somewhere and then get events based on where you are. And these are ones based on your character. And as I mentioned earlier on, your captain or someone like that can also take your place and have some of these adventures as well. So again, you can read through this on your own time. There's a bunch of examples here. You can see the rewards they give, what it costs you. You can get provisions this way. You get other trait modifiers, all these kind of things. It looks like it's going to be a cool little kind of adventure that you can have inside your already set up adventures. And there's some really cool content here as well. So a lot of cool stuff to read through. As I said, it's massive is this story. So I'm not going to cover it here, but do go and read it in your own time. And then one of the last things they're going to cover in this dev diary is Expelling Adventurers. So this was talked about last week, where you can actually expel adventurers from your realm if you don't like them for whatever reason. And you do this via a character interaction, which will stop any contracts from being generated there. It will force them to leave your lands, and it will also force them out if they ever end up back in there. Any contracts that they are currently holding or have yet discovered in your lands are immediately invalidated, criminal or not. Expulsion is a long-lasting opinion, so it will reset if either of you die. If many, many years pass, it'll reset also, but that is obviously the very long-term option. Once you do this, they will have 3 months to exit your realm from the date you send the letter, and if they even have a small military force, they can stay, but the potential risks are dire, and they're going to get into those right now. Refusing an eviction order means you will make an imprisonment attempt against them as soon as the 3 months have expired. If this fails, the adventurer begins an offensive war against you, the evicting ruler. You're considered the defender because it's your land, and they're just squatting in it. So you can, in those first 3 months, either they do decide to leave anyway, you can do the imprisonment mechanic against them. If all of that fails, you actually just get a war started and you can just go defeat their army. And then obviously that kicks them out and all that good stuff as well. So you can see here, Expel Adventurer, if their camp is still in your realm after 3 months, you can attempt to imprison them and you obviously lose opinion of them. The effects on the guy who is squatting your lands, he loses 30 opinion of you and he cannot be offered any contracts in your realm. So again, they're kind of like the two sides of it once you declare this. If the adventurer wins, they have utterly defeated your realm and usurp it as though it was a conquest, which is crazy. I guess you are going to have to be careful with this because after the 3 months, it sounds like the war is immediately started. You don't get to like backtrack on it. So if you try and evict somebody and they say no, they can then defeat you in that war and then just keep all your land. If the landed ruler wins, however, they imprison the adventurer and destroy their camp permanently. So yeah, you do have some risk to this, especially if you are the person that this is happening to. Refusing an eviction notice is, no matter how it ends, a very serious affair. You can either leave or accept that one way or another your camp is going no further. I guess that's true, actually. If the war is declared, if you lose, it gets destroyed. And if you win, you take over all their lands and you'll no longer be landless. So again, yeah, that is a good point, actually. I guess you can almost, not like accidentally become landed, but I guess there will be some scenarios that play out where you accidentally get into this potentially and you're kind of stuck and you do have to kind of exit the landless gameplay one way or another. Once an eviction has been accepted or white peace in a war, any lands controlled by the evicting ruler can no longer be travelled to by this adventurer. They can be travelled through, largely for mechanical reasons, but cannot be used as an end destination and won't generate contracts till the opinion expires. If an adventurer ends up in lands they've been exiled for any reason, they are automatically rerouted out of them again. I guess this could happen if you kind of maybe go on crusade and somebody that you've been exiled out of previously wins the war, you're still in those lands and they take over as ruler and then you're technically in their lands again and they would kick you out. I'm not too sure about, like, you are evicted, but you can travel through their lands still. I get why mechanically it has to work that way, I guess. Like, they don't want to cut off massive swathes of the map. If you think about, like, the HRE, if it somehow ended up, like, controlling a vertical slice of the map, you would, in theory, get locked out from moving across the map at all. Although I guess you could move across the sea. Actually, no, thinking about it, I kind of wish it did work that way. It would actually be pretty cool where you were actually blocked out from traveling across a map in a whole section because you were kind of evicted from there. I guess in this scenario, you're kind of like sneaking through under disguise. Who's really going to notice you? Whereas if you go for a contract, that person's obviously going to know who you are. So I can see why, like, in-game it works this way. But I think it would have been cool if it did actually block and it really caused you to detour around the map a lot more than if you didn't have these happening. But again, I kind of see why it does work this way. The next thing we're going to talk about is make a request. This is the second to last thing, guys. So if you've made it this far, make sure you do hit that like button. But we are almost at the end of this video for today. Once you've got your foot in the door with a ruler, they're vulnerable to all sorts of wheeling and dealing. This is where you can get your patrons and then they can give you some rewards. In-game, this is represented with a make a request character interaction. This is usable on patrons, your close and extended family, and your consorts. This allows adventurers to just really aggressively mooch from a target, just get right in there, blag your heart out, burn your opinion with your patron, and eagerly exchange that for resources. The requests you'll likely make are most often for restocking your provisions, providing you with extra gold. These aren't substitutes for contracts, but they can supplement your income and help you bounce back from rough times. Many contracts give you bonus opinion upon completion for a patron, and a fair few will reward you with a hook on critical success that you can then automatically trade in for these rewards. A more interesting reward is to have them help you recruit a random men-at-arms accessible to them, providing you with another way to build your army laterally or loan you a knight for a couple of years, so different ways you can trade these in for rewards. Most notably, this is the only way to gain access to the marriage interaction with landed rulers, either for yourself or your followers. Finally, if you are eligible, you can try wrangle further contracts out of them. You can use this to build your relations further by doing good jobs for the same characters. Perhaps not too relevant if you're just a counter or baron, but if you do manage to get into a good thing with a king, that is going to be extra rewarding for you. And you can see here the different options. You can trade this in for provisions, gold, a men-at-arms regiment, rent a knight, arrange a marriage, or for a contract. All of these are going to have different requirements. As they've already said, the marriage one is probably going to be even harder than just picking provisions for this choice. And for balance reasons, make a request requires you to have close geographical proximity to the target's capital, which is much, much closer than diplomatic range. This helps to stop you from traveling to India only to teleport a gold reserves from, say, Scotland. If you want a favor from someone, you need to be close to them. We've actually applied this restriction to a few other key interactions, but make a request is the main one. So this system has actually been expanded out to other things. You do actually need to be close to the person you're asking. As they say here, you can't be in India and ask for a bunch of gold from Scotland. You're too far away. It just doesn't work that way. And this is going to limit how far you can do it. And then as they've said at the very beginning of this dev diary, all of this is going through balance. So don't worry too much about what you see here. These numbers will get changed before the release comes around. And with that, guys, that is the end of the actual content for this part of the dev diary. So between this one and the first one, we've pretty much got a full picture here of how landless gameplay is going to work. So let me know what you think in the comments down below. What do you like? What do you not like? One thing you're not going to like is this last section of the dev diary, absent faces. And in this, they wanted to cover a few of the elephants in the room that didn't particularly come up earlier in the dev diary. I think that is through choice, kind of hiding this in a way at the end of the dev diary. But this is something that they want to get out of the way. And they do apologize here if this is something you were looking forward to. The first one is, as I said at the beginning of the video so long ago, raiding. Adventurers cannot raid, and their camp cannot be raided on the map. So I'm not going to read through the reasons here. Really, the main reasons are raiding is by far and away the easiest way to earn gold, and that would pretty much just break this whole system because you could just raid for so much gold, you could just build all the buildings, and it would pretty much negate most of this system. A lot of it is around doing the contracts to get gold and all that kind of stuff. And this would just be too good. The not being able to siege down their camp, they say here it just wouldn't make sense. You could just have one cannon and just like bang, it's gone. It just wouldn't work as a siegeable location. You might think, well, as a ruler, like if I don't like somebody, I should be able to go siege it down, take all their stuff or destroy it. But again, they're just saying it doesn't fit into this system. The AI would have a hard time even figuring it out. And it just wasn't worth all the effort to do this. And it just didn't really fit into the system and how it worked. Now, the raiding side of it, I can kind of see that. I do think there could have been a way for them to make it work. I'm not sure what it is. I'm not a game designer, but maybe they could have had it where you're like a sponsored raider, and maybe you could go raiding and most of the money went to somebody else. And that is a way you could do this if you wanted to, but it wouldn't be that good to actually do. I'm not too sure. It could work that way. Something along those lines. Maybe in the future we will get a DLC. It's kind of funny. I would imagine if the Northern Lords DLC hadn't come out yet, and that came out in the future, they would have added this as an option. There would be some way to redo it as part of a DLC to work that way. So maybe in the future we will get a version of this, but as they say here, it isn't going to be in here. You can't raid. I did say in the last video I thought you would be able to, just because there was like a Ravager trait or something, and that sounded like you would be able to do raiding, but you can't, guys. So there we go. At the end of the dev diary, at the end of part 2, they do semi-sneak in here that you can't go raiding. So there we go. Let me know what you think about that in the comments down below. I am surprised, but I do kind of see their logic here, and you can read through that in the dev diary if you want to. But again, I kind of see what they're saying. It wouldn't work really that well. The other thing they want to call out here is that there is obviously no child adventurers. It wouldn't really work narratively, and also like who's going to believe like a 10-year-old as a wandering adventurer getting up to some shenanigans. So again, you can't be a child adventurer, you have to be an adult to do it. And with that, that kind of covers the kind of like absent things that you might have been wondering about with how all the system works. And with that, as I've already said, that is the end of the dev diaries on Landless Adventurers. That covers pretty much everything. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. Do leave feedback on the forums. As I said, the link will be there. So do give some feedback about what you think about it. As they've already been saying, this is going through balancing at the moment. So if there's anything you've seen, you think that's too easy, that's too hard, that should give better rewards, do let them know, and they will hopefully change that before launch. But with all of that being said, I'm going to leave you there for today. I believe this video is probably going to be at least an hour and a half long, so do hit that like button if you've somehow made it this far. Do subscribe to the channel if you're new here. I cover Crusader Kings in this style. I also do Let's Plays. I've got a fantastic one coming up soon that I can't talk about yet, and then I've got some other content coming in the near future as well. I also cover EU5 in the same way. If you are unaware, that was kind of like stealth announced. It is called Project Caesar at the moment, but everyone knows it's EU5, and I'm covering those dev diaries on the channel as well. But we'll leave it there for today, and I'll see you in the next one.